Well, yesterday we brought you the decision there by the Liberal Party's federal executive to sack the New South Wales Party's executive, put in place that committee of management. They'll run the division for the next 10 months in the lead up to the federal election. Richard Alston, of course, I mentioned him before, Alan Stockdale. And the third name, well, it was meant to be Mr Stokes, Rob Stokes, but he is not joining the panel. So who will it be? Well, we'll get into that now. Sky News senior reporter Trudy McIntosh joins me, and Carolyn Marcus. Ladies, not a good start, Trudy, for the Libs today. I made the point, though, it just underscores why they needed, at a federal level, this intervention.
Yeah, looking on from Canberra, what an absolute mess, and trying to figure out how they stuffed this up last night. It's quite confusing. Peter Dutton saying he was told by New South Wales Rob Stokes was going to be fine. Mark Speakman today saying, he'd had an informal conversation, but it hadn't been locked in. And Rob Stokes apparently was in New Zealand. And the first he'd heard of it, he says, was reading it in the paper. It's just a debacle. I heard Mark Speakman today saying he didn't think voters will care about, the machinations of the Liberal division. Maybe that's true, but the broader optics of what do they say? If you can't govern yourself, you can't govern the country. I just think that rings a bit true. It just looks so messy that you can't file paperwork and you can't figure out which three people could run a branch for you.
I think certainly I've got faith in Richard Alston. I used to work for Richard Alston, and I've seen Alan Stockdale at close quarters. He takes no prisoners. They are two good picks. The third will be the challenge. Speakman today said he now wants a woman, now that Stokes has fallen over. Someone in the papers today was saying that the panel's too much about Victoria and it's pale, male and stale. I don't know. I'll tell you what, I'd be more focused on competence rather than gender and skin colour. But they're sounding out other names, Caroline. Do we know who's in the mix?
Well, not yet, Peter, but I have heard Bronwyn Bishop, the former Speaker of the House and, of course, our own contributor here at Sky News, her name being thrown about, but I understand that she has not yet been approached directly, and it's highly unlikely that she would put her hand up for this. While there's no doubts about Bronwyn's competence, I don't think she would want to be someone who's seen as a token woman on any panel. And, for me personally, if I was a politician in the running, I would hate to be seen as any kind of diversity pick after the opposition leader's comments about wanting a woman. I can understand why they do it, because the Liberal Party has come under so much criticism for not having enough women, but I just don't think any woman would who is wise enough would want to perhaps put their hands up to be anyone's diversity pick. However, I do agree with Margaret Thatcher that if you want something said, ask a man, but if you want something done, ask a woman. So if someone is going to clear up the New South Wales Liberal Party, maybe it does have to be a woman.
Just hope they pick someone who knows how to win an election, because that's been the problem there for some time. OK, we know Labor loves to splash around the cash. We saw that in those GDP numbers. A lot of it's driven by the spending in Canberra by Labor and a lot of these state Labor governments. I'll get to that in a moment with Terry McCrann. But the Prime Minister today, this is extraordinary. He's racked up nearly $4 million in expenses over the last financial year just to run his office. Now, this is travel for his staff, $2.5 million. I have never seen staff travel that high. They should be on the Prime Minister's private plane. They're already paying for that plane, whether the seats are full. They shouldn't be on a Qantas flight. $900,000 for his own international travel, $250,000 for printing. That's about fair. $100,000 for Comcars. He's got a security detail. That's about fair. It doesn't include his personal salary. That's $600,000. But listen to this, Trudy. His staff bill, his wages bill, is about $10 million. He's got 61 staff. That's more than Rudd had and Gillard had and Abbott had and more. And this is nothing at all here in terms of the costs to run the lodge and Kirribilli and all that other expenditure. $14.5 million is the estimate to run Albanese's office for just 1 year.
These expenses stories come and go, don't you? We've both seen them a lot in our time covering politics. So it never looks good, this number splashed on the front page of a tabloid paper. If you're an average punter, you look at that number and you go, geez, that's very high. And it's a particularly notable story in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I thought the Prime Minister's answer today was interesting, to not get into the weeds of some of it, but just say, what do you do? What do you want me to do? Not go in my com car with my security driver, and pivoting back to that he'd much prefer to drive. He also likes to point out, Peter, he wants to go to the shops, and he goes to the shops quite a lot. So he doesn't want to be seen as out of touch, our Prime Minister.
Yeah, but I also know, Trudy, how it works. I know his housekeeper buys his deodorant and the milk in his fridge, whether he's at the lodge or whether he's at Kirribilli House. Most people tonight don't know all of that detail. And I, as I said, haven't seen staff salaries that high. I haven't seen staff travel that high. I mean, I used to try and tell people, if it's a short flight, I don't care if you're entitled to a business class seat, please try and fly economy. And if the boss is taking the jet, get on the jet. The jet's already paid for. As I said, whether it's full, whether it's empty, save the taxpayer some money. And that's not what's not happening up in Queensland. Stephen Miles up there, the Queensland Premier, he was under fire today, Caroline. He took an 11-minute flight from Harvey Bay to Bundaberg on his government jet. He celebrated while he was there at MP's birthday. He announced a new fence. It must be a fancy fence. Today he tried to defend himself. Good luck with that. Have a listen.
It might be easy fodder for tabloid newspapers, but it would have cost more to hire a car for that one leg, and the other legs could not be completed by another transport mode.
A bloke's a clown, and he's got an election next month. Where's his brain, Caroline?
None of this passes the pub test, Peter, does it, as we like to say. I mean, that would have been a 1 hour 20 trip by road, and he claims that it didn't cost any extra because the government had already leased the plane. I find that a little bit hard to believe. But even if that's the case, what about the carbon emissions that Labor claims that it cares so deeply about? And then he has the poor judgment to post photographs of himself that you just showed, celebrating one of his MP's birthdays with a couple of cakes, as if voters really care. We're all dealing with a cost of living crisis. Does he really think that this kind of rubbish is going to help get his government elected again? Honestly, at the next election, it won't. And it's not the first time that he's come under fire for this kind of thing. You'll remember a bit earlier this year, he and the police commissioner took a couple of jets for 5 days for trips between zipping around Brisbane and regional Queensland to the tune of almost $170,000. So he has form on this. The school fence, it must have certainly been fancy. They didn't even do a press announcement of it, so we don't really know. And that fence will only be built if his government is re-elected. And at this rate, you've got to say it probably won't happen.
Let's go to that story in the Sydney Morning Herald, Trudy, because I thought it was very interesting. 3 sources have expressed frustration and briefed out detail of a cabinet discussion. This was all around the issue of the census. And according to the report, the PM was the one who kiboshed the questions about sexual orientation and gender status. Now, what's interesting here was the PM then later on who had to do the backflip. But also, I think this is the first significant time we've seen a leak from Labor's cabinet, isn't it?
Yeah, I was very surprised to see 3 cabinet ministers apparently speaking to the 9 newspapers this morning on this issue, speaking about what the Prime Minister had said and his level of frustration inside cabinet. The whole census issue to me last week was emblematic of 2 big issues that are facing this government at the moment. One is the inability to nip an issue in the bud. It dragged from Sunday to Friday before the Prime Minister then confirmed the government's position. All the while, 3 of his cabinet ministers had said the opposite thing. But also that Labor essentially is jumping at shadows, that it was too afraid to even have a debate about this, according to its ministers publicly, on an issue that it says it believes in. So 2 really big issues to me being raised about what does this government believe in? If it's in power, what's it there to do? That's becoming, there's increasing frustrations you detect when you speak to Labor people here about how this government's tracking.
Just quickly, Caroline, you broke a story today about really dodgy data to justify bike lanes in Sydney.
That's right. So Clover Moore, who's the Lord Mayor here in Sydney, and she is a very progressive figure. She and the City of Sydney Council have said that between about 3,200 bike riders use this particular street, Oxford Street, really famous shopping strip near the CBD in Sydney every day. Now, business owners were really sceptical of this because she's trying to get a cycleway built here, which they say is going to be catastrophic for their businesses with all the construction that's happening. So they organised their own 24-hour bike count, and lo and behold, it found that there were only about 305 bike riders, not 3,200. So about 10% of that figure that used that road in the last 24 hours. So the figures appear to be massively inflated, and it's being used to push, of course, this green agenda that's been supported by the federal Teal MP, Allegra Spender. Here is what some of those business owners and residents had to tell us today.
People of Paddington and the store owners aren't against cycling. We're just against stupidity.
We lost 70% of the businesses, completely gone once they moved. So I probably will be one of them.
It's terribly disappointing. I mean, really disappointing. It's now my way or the highway.